On February 23, 2022, the Russian military was, on paper, the second most powerful armed force on the planet. Roughly 190,000 troops staged on Ukraine's borders, thousands of tanks, hundreds of cruise missiles, and a plan to capture a capital city of 3 million people in 72 hours. 3 days. That was the entire timeline. Some Russian units reportedly packed their dress uniforms, the parade ones, for the victory march through Kyiv. They never wore them. And the reason they never wore them is one of the most instructive military collapses of the modern era. A plan so confident it forgot to bring a backup. You can watch the whole thing unravel, hour by hour, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to walk you through that day the way the planners should have, and clearly didn't. Before we laugh at it, we have to respect it. Because the plan was clever. That's what makes the rest of this so painful. Russian ground forces, by their own long-standing doctrine, typically carry about 3 to 5 days of fuel and ammunition with them. That's not a guess. Military analysts have documented it for decades. So, if your entire army is built to operate for 3 to 5 days before it needs a serious resupply, the math hands you exactly one viable strategy. Finish the war before the tank hits empty. So Moscow didn't plan a grinding invasion. It planned a decapitation. Don't fight through the Ukrainian army. Go over it, straight for the head. Seize an airfield on the doorstep of Kyiv. Fly in waves of elite paratroopers, punch into the city, and capture or scare off the government before anyone could organize a defense. Do that in 3 days, and you never need a long supply line. You never need a plan B. Which was very convenient because, and I cannot stress this enough, they didn't really make one. If you want more breakdowns like this, subscribe. New operation every week. Around 5 in the morning, Vladimir Putin appears on television and announces what he calls a special military operation. He claims it's limited. He claims he has no plans to occupy Ukraine. Most Ukrainians are asleep when he says it. They do not stay asleep for long. Within minutes of the speech ending, missiles begin landing across the entire country, airfields, air defense installations, command posts. Roughly 400 missiles would be fired. In that first week, a large share of them concentrated right at the start. The objective was textbook: blind the Ukrainian Air Force and air defenses before the sun even came up. And here's the uncomfortable part. Partially, it worked. Russian forces successfully jammed some Ukrainian radars and suppressed 2 major air defense sites along the Dnipro River north of Kyiv. Credit where it's due. For about an hour, the plan was actually going to plan. That suppressed corridor along the river, the one they just punched open, is not a random detail. It is the doorway for the main event. The single operation the entire 3-day clock is built around. Remember that corridor. We're coming back to it in about 4 minutes, and it does not age well. 12 miles from the center of Kyiv sits Hostomel Airport, also known as Antonov Airport. It has a long, heavy runway built to test some of the largest cargo aircraft ever made, which means it's one of the few places near the capital where you could land a fleet of military transport planes full of reinforcements. If you're running a decapitation strike on Kyiv, Hostomel isn't a target. It's the target. It's the front door. Around 6 or 7 in the morning, 2 Kaliber cruise missiles open the assault on Hostomel. One missile misses the barracks and craters an empty parade field. The second misses and lands near a residential building. 2 precision cruise missiles. Final score: 1 empty parade ground, 1 near miss on some apartments, 0 military targets. The most accurate thing about the opening salvo was how accurately it avoided anything that mattered. But the missiles were never the main act. The main act is already in the air, and it's flying low up that nice clear corridor along the Dnipro. About 34 helicopters, Mi-8 transports packed with paratroopers, screened by Ka-52 Alligator gunships, and a few older Mi-28s. On board, 200 to 300 men from the 31st Guards Air Assault Brigade. the VDV, Russia's elite airborne, the best Moscow had. This is the tip of the entire spear. The 3-day plan, airborne inbound right now. Here's the assumption the whole operation rested on. Hostomel would be lightly held by a few conscripts who would take one look at elite Russian paratroopers and run. Now it was lightly held by conscripts from the National Guard's 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade. The assumption fell apart at the second half of the sentence. They did not run. As the helicopters sweep in around mid-morning, a single Ukrainian guardsman with a shoulder-fired missile takes a shot and hits a Ka-52. That's the first confirmed aircraft loss of the entire invasion. Scored, in the opening hours, by exactly the kind of soldier the plans assumed would be halfway to the next town by now. And it cascades. Ukrainian troops with manpads, shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles, start working the formation. More Ka-52s come down, and Mi-28 comes down. The exact tally differs between Russian and Ukrainian accounts, and we're not going to pretend a precise number we can't verify. But multiple gunships, the escorts meant to protect the landing, are knocked out of the sky over the target. The transports try to put troops down anyway. They run into so much small arms fire that some are forced to break off and circle the surrounding villages, waiting for the fire to die down. The most feared airborne force in the region, doing slow circles over the Kyiv suburbs, because the undefended airport would not stop shooting at them. Now, in fairness, and on this channel we are always fair, even to people who packed parade uniforms to a gunfight, the VDV were genuinely good. Despite the losses, around 100 paratroopers get on the ground, and by early afternoon they physically hold Hostomel Airport. On paper, objective captured. Send the telegram. Mission accomplished. Except read the actual objective again. It was never stand on the runway. It was to turn Hostomel into an air bridge, to fly in heavy transport planes loaded with reinforcements and armor, and pour that force straight into Kyiv. And by the time they're holding the field, the runway is cratered, the airport is under Ukrainian artillery fire, and the sky overhead is still contested. You cannot land a fleet of transport aircraft on a runway that's being shelled by the people who used to own it. They captured the airport. They could not open the airport. It's the military equivalent of winning the keys to a car with no engine. Then it gets worse. By evening, Ukrainian forces counterattack, the 4th Brigade, reinforced by the 45th Spetsnaz Regiment. The airfield is retaken or rendered useless. The surviving paratroopers scatter into the forests around Hostomel. The single most important objective of Day 1, the hinge the entire 72-hour plan swung on, was, by nightfall, gone. While Hostomel was burning, the rest of the invasion ran on the exact same optimism. Columns crossed in from 3 directions at once, south from Belarus toward Kyiv, west from Russia into the east, and north out of Crimea. And early on, some of it worked. In the south, where Ukrainian forces were thin, the Russians made real, fast progress. By the second day, they were reaching the outskirts of Kyiv itself. But the same fatal assumption was baked into all of it. This will be over in 3 days, so don't overthink logistics. Russian troops rolled in carrying their 3 to 5 days of supplies and very little behind them to top it back up, because the plan never expected to need a refill. And it wasn't bloodless. In the northeast, around Sumy, Ukrainian troops using American Javelin anti-tank missiles destroyed a reported 15 Russian tanks. The cheap weapon versus expensive machine pattern that would come to define this entire war was already on display, on the very first day. Here's where that 3-day clock from the beginning turns into the punchline of the decade. When the Hostomel air bridge collapsed, the fast route into Kyiv vanished with it. The reinforcements that were supposed to be flown in now had to be driven in instead, south out of Belarus, along the roads. That road march became the single most famous traffic jam in modern military history, the 40-mile convoy. And now the lack of a plan B stops being a throwaway line and becomes the whole story. Analysts later pointed out that the Russian command system hands down extremely detailed, specific orders, rather than broad intent and trust in local commanders. So when the script broke, the officers on the ground often didn't have the authority or the information to improvise. The machine was built to run one program flawlessly. Nobody had written the second one. The convoy ground to a halt. It got stuck in mud. It ran short of fuel. It ran short of food. According to a former commander of the UK Joint Forces Command, it even ran low on batteries and on tires, some so badly maintained they simply failed. The Pentagon's public assessment was about as blunt as these things get. The convoy was stalled. Some units, in their words, were literally out of gas. A column from the second strongest army on Earth, parked bumper to bumper on a highway 20 miles from its target, slowly running out of diesel and sandwiches, because the entire operation had been designed around the assumption that it would already be over. Step back from the whole day, and the structure of the disaster is almost elegant in how fragile it was. The plan needed speed. Speed needed the air bridge. The air bridge needed Hostomel. And Hostomel was defended by the exact people the plan had written off as guaranteed to run, and they refused to. Pull that one thread on the morning of February 24th, and the entire 72-hour fantasy unravels directly into the largest ground war Europe has seen since the Second World War. President Zelensky himself later put the stakes plainly, that if Kyiv had fallen in those first days, the war would have been lost. It did not fall. And the dress uniforms stayed folded in their bags. Zoom all the way out, and day one doesn't actually teach you that Russia was weak. Its army was large, its missiles were real, parts of the opening hours genuinely worked. What day one teaches is something older and more universal. A plan with zero margin for error needs a perfect world to land in. It needs every assumption to hold, every enemy to behave, every conscript to run on cue. And reality almost never returns that favor. On February 24th, reality showed up in the form of a National Guardsman with a missile launcher who had not been handed a copy of Moscow's script, and the most powerful invasion plan in Europe broke against him. That 40-mile convoy we left starving on the highway, it sat there for weeks. One of the most expensive parking violations in the history of warfare, before something finally happened to it. That's the next briefing. Next time on BattlegroundZero, how a 40-mile army ran out of gas within sight of its target and what came for it in the dark. Subscribe. Every operation, every decision, fully animated.